While I was fighting for my life in the ICU, my brother took everything I had. My business, my future, my trust. He thought I was weak, but he had no idea what was coming. This is the story of how betrayal turned into a fight for everything I'd lost, and how I made him pay for every single choice he made. Watch to see how I took back what was mine and shattered everything he held dear. I had never thought I'd find myself lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines, my life hanging by a thread. The ICU was sterile, the constant beep of monitors, a grim reminder of how quickly life could flip. A week before that, I had been at the top of my game, managing my business, expanding my team, and envisioning the future. But in a split second, it all came crashing down. It was an accident. A bad one. I was driving back from a meeting with a potential investor when the other driver lost control, slamming into my car head-on. I woke up in the hospital, confused, surrounded by medical staff. The pain was unbearable, and the tubes and wires attached to me felt like chains holding me to the bed. It took me a few moments to grasp what had happened, but once the fog started to lift, I knew one thing for sure. My brother, Jake, had moved in on my business. Jake. My brother. My blood. We had always had a complicated relationship, but I never imagined he would do this. He was never the kind to step up in a crisis, let alone take over the one thing I had worked my entire life to build. I had built this business from the ground up, making sacrifices, putting in the hours, and taking risks others wouldn't dare. And now, while I lay in an ICU bed, my brother was quietly taking control of it all. I knew Jake too well. He was always looking for the easy way out, never interested in doing the hard work. He had always floated around, bouncing between odd jobs and schemes, never committing to anything for long. But when I was incapacitated, I guess he saw an opportunity. A chance to step into my shoes, take the reins, and claim what was never meant to be his. It didn't take long for me to figure out how he was doing it. It started with small things, adjustments in the books, shifting the focus of projects, and little changes in the way things were done at the office. Then it escalated. My trusted manager, someone I had known for years, was suddenly on Jake's side. The meetings I had been planning were now in his hands. Clients who had once called me directly were now redirected to him. It was as if he was erasing me from my own business, and I had no way of stopping him. The anger began to boil inside me. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a calculated move to take what was mine. While I was helpless, my brother took what I had built with my sweat and blood. I knew then, in that sterile room, that I would not let this go. I didn't care if I had to crawl out of that ICU bed and drag myself to the door. I would get my business back. But I had a bigger plan. I wasn't going to just take back what was mine. I would show Jake that this kind of betrayal came with consequences, and I wasn't going to stop until I had taken everything from him. His house, his car, his reputation. With the same ruthlessness that he had shown me, I would take it all. I spent the next few weeks in and out of consciousness, my body healing slowly but my mind sharp. The doctors kept telling me to rest, to take it easy, but every waking moment in that sterile hospital room only fueled the fire inside me. The anger, the frustration, and the overwhelming sense of betrayal gnawed at me. Jake wasn't just playing dirty, he was playing with my life. When I finally left the ICU, I was a shell of the person I used to be. Physically, I was weak, my body still bruised and battered from the accident. But my mind, my resolve, was sharper than ever. I couldn't go back to my business just yet. There were too many things I needed to take care of first. I needed to find out exactly what Jake had done, who was helping him, and how deep his betrayal ran. I started calling in favors, old friends, colleagues I'd worked with in the past, people who knew me well enough to understand what was at stake. The first piece of the puzzle came quickly. It turned out Jake hadn't just been moving in on my business. He had made it official. He had taken legal steps to position himself as the rightful owner of several key projects and accounts, exploiting the loopholes that arose in my absence. He was using my incapacitation as the perfect cover for his plan. Jake, the opportunistic bastard, had played it well. But I had one advantage. Jake had always been reckless. He wasn't good at covering his tracks. I knew his habits, his weaknesses, and where he liked to cut corners. While I was still recovering, I began mapping out a plan to reclaim what was mine. It wouldn't be quick or easy, but it would be decisive. The first strike came a month after I left the hospital. I had hired a private investigator to look into Jake's finances, his dealings, and his personal life. It didn't take long for him to uncover what I suspected. Jake's entire financial world was built on a foundation of lies and poor decisions. He had racked up debt, falsified accounts, and even forged signatures to secure loans. He thought no one would notice, but I would. I had always been meticulous about the details. With this information, I went to work. I started by making a few quiet calls to some of the people who had once trusted Jake with their investments. A couple of them were old clients of mine, others were business partners. It was easy enough to get them on my side. They hadn't realized what was happening until it was too late. Now they were just as eager to see Jake taken down as I was. I didn't make any grand gestures. I didn't storm into Jake's office and confront him. No, I was smarter than that. Instead, I used the information I had gathered to quietly undermine his credibility. I started a whisper campaign, sending anonymous tips to the people in the industry who would care. The rumors began circulating that Jake was involved in financial mismanagement. Investors started pulling out. People began asking questions. And when the pressure mounted, Jake started to crack. It was beautiful in its simplicity. Every small move I made was like a stone dropped into the water, rippling outwards until the damage was done. Jake's carefully constructed house of cards was falling apart, and he didn't even know it yet. I watched from the sidelines as his empire crumbled. But this was just the beginning. While Jake dealt with the fallout, I focused on the bigger picture. I knew I had to hit him where it would hurt the most. His pride, his assets, and everything he thought was secure would soon be gone. But first, I needed to secure one thing: the house he loved so much. The house that in his mind was his fortress. The home he had built with the money he thought he had stolen from me. I wasn't just going to take it back. I was going to make him watch as I took it all. Jake had always been a show-off. He loved flaunting the things that he thought made him superior. His flashy car, his designer clothes, his fancy house in the suburbs. He often bragged about how he had made it, how he was living the dream. As if the world owed him something. That house, with its grand entrance and oversized garage, was his trophy, his statement to the world that he had won. But it wasn't his house. It was mine. The property had always been in my name, even before we started the business together. I had bought it years ago, long before Jake decided to attach himself to my success like a parasite. I had let him stay there after he'd gone through a rough patch, assuming he would get back on his feet and contribute, just like we talked about when we were younger. But that was before the betrayal. Now the house was the symbol of everything he had taken from me, and it would be the first thing I reclaimed. I didn't go about it in a typical way. I wasn't interested in fighting him directly. The legal system is slow, cumbersome, and expensive. I had been in business long enough to understand that sometimes the best way to take something back is by taking the long road, quietly and strategically. I called in favors, of course: lawyers, bankers, real estate agents. I knew exactly who I needed to talk to. My first move was securing a lien on the property, a little-known financial trick that would allow me to seize control of the house without going through the lengthy process of formal eviction. Jake had neglected some paperwork during his attempt to claim my business, and that mistake would cost him. I had a few people in my corner who were eager to see him pay for the mess he'd made. It didn't take long for the bank to get involved once the lien was in place. Jake had missed a couple of crucial payments, probably because he didn't realize I had set the trap. I could already see the panic in his eyes when I saw him at a business meeting one day. He didn't say much, just gave me a cold stare. But I knew what was coming. I watched as Jake began scrambling, calling anyone who could help him, trying to buy himself some time. The house was about to slip through his fingers, and he knew it. The first hint of desperation in his voice came when he called me to discuss the lien, pretending to play the victim, asking for my help. He even mentioned trying to sell the house quickly to pay off the debts. But it was too late. His reputation was damaged, and there was no one left who was willing to bail him out. I didn't respond to his calls. I didn't need to. The second phase of my plan was already in motion. A week later, I had an offer to buy the house at a price far below its market value, one that Jake wouldn't be able to refuse. But this wasn't about just taking his property. It was about sending a message. I wasn't here to negotiate or fight. I was here to take back what was mine, and I was going to do it without mercy. Jake was cornered. He had no idea I had already made arrangements to purchase the house under a different name. When I closed the deal, I made sure to let him know. The house, his pride, was mine again. The look on his face when he found out was priceless. He tried to fight it, of course. He called lawyers, made threats, and tried to make it sound like I was the one who had wronged him. But he couldn't stop it. The papers were signed, and the house was in my hands. I didn't need to say much, no need for confrontation or petty words. The message had been delivered. Jake had taken my business while I was in the ICU. Now I had taken his house, the one thing he had thought would define him. His fortress had crumbled, and I had claimed it. But that was only the beginning. The house was just a start. Jake had something else that I needed to take, and I would get it. The next target would hit him harder than the house ever could. His car, his reputation, everything he had built on the back of my sacrifice was about to fall apart. Jake loved his car. It was more than just a vehicle to him. It was a symbol of success, of his supposed arrival. A sleek black sports car that turned heads wherever it went. He treated that car like it was his best friend, flaunting it whenever he could, showing it off to anyone who would listen. To him, it was his escape, his proof that he had made it big. But it was more than that. It was a tool in his twisted narrative that he had worked hard to create, that he was the one who had everything under control. I knew he cherished it, and I knew that was exactly why it had to go. The house was just a piece of the puzzle. The car was the crown jewel of his arrogance. It was time to break him even further. I had already taken control of the house, and now I needed to take the next thing that mattered to him. Jake's car wasn't just about luxury, it was his shield. Every time he drove it, he felt untouchable. I had to shatter that illusion. Jake hadn't seen it coming. He had been so preoccupied with the business and the chaos surrounding his failed takeover attempt that he didn't notice the quiet changes happening around him. He didn't notice that the credit card bills for his car were being paid by someone else. He didn't notice that the car's insurance had been quietly switched into my name, nor that I had arranged for a tow service to pick it up from his garage. One late evening, as Jake was drowning in meetings and phone calls, I made my move. I didn't give him a chance to fight it. The car was gone before he even had a chance to realize what had happened. When he called me the next day, his voice was shaking with panic and rage. "Where the hell is my car?" he demanded. "I sold it," I replied flatly. "It wasn't yours to keep anymore." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of him cursing under his breath. He was angry, yes, but more than that, he was terrified. He had never seen me like this before, never understood the full extent of what I was capable of when pushed to the limit. Jake had always assumed I would roll over, that I would back down, but I wasn't the same person he had taken advantage of all those years. "That car was mine," he shouted. "Not anymore," I answered coldly. "You'll have to find a way to get by without it." The satisfaction I felt hearing his voice crack was bittersweet. The car was gone, and it wasn't just the loss of a luxury item, it was the loss of his confidence, the loss of his identity. Jake had built himself up on illusions, and each piece I took away from him was another illusion shattered. But I wasn't done yet. The car was a blow, but it was still just a distraction compared to the final thing I had to take from him. His reputation. Jake had always been the charming, smooth talker, convincing others that he was successful, that he was someone to be admired. It was time to expose him for who he really was. I knew where he had hidden the cracks in his image. His financial mismanagement, his shady dealings, and the lies he had told to everyone around him, all of it could be brought to light. But I had to make it count. I needed to destroy the persona he had created, to leave him with nothing but the raw truth. So I made some calls. I had contacts who knew the inner workings of his business dealings, people who had seen the behind-the-scenes mess he had made. I started to leak those details carefully. I made sure they hit at the right time, when Jake was least expecting it, when he thought things were finally turning in his favor. By the time the first story about his questionable business practices hit the news, Jake was already reeling from the loss of his car. When the second story came out, revealing the extent of his financial troubles and shady dealings with investors, he was officially on the ropes. He tried to downplay it at first, issuing statements and blaming others, but it didn't take long for the public to see through his facade. The whispers about Jake's character, his inability to keep his promises, and his constant need to rely on others to clean up his mess grew louder. The stories didn't stop. One by one, people started pulling away from him, business partners, clients, even friends. They had all seen the cracks in his armor, and now it was all coming apart. Jake's once gilded image was collapsing, piece by piece, just like his life. I watched from the sidelines, knowing that this was only the beginning. As I had taken his house and his car, I was now taking something far more precious: his standing in the world. His reputation was no longer his to control. I had made sure of that, but there was still one final thing I had to take. The one thing he would never get back. His sense of invincibility. By the time I was done, Jake would have nothing left. Not his house, not his car, and certainly not the reputation he had so carefully built on the back of my sacrifice. No, by the end of it, Jake would have to face the cold reality of what he had done to me. The game wasn't over, not by a long shot. Jake had always been the type to think he could talk his way out of anything. He thought he was invincible, that his silver tongue could fix any problem, smooth over any issue. But when his reputation began to crumble, he had no idea what to do. The more he tried to patch things up, the worse it got. Every statement he issued only added fuel to the fire. He couldn't keep up with the avalanche of bad press, and the lies he'd spent years telling came crashing down around him. I knew this moment was coming. It wasn't enough to take his house, his car, and his credibility. I had to make him feel the weight of what he had done to me. Not just in a financial sense, but in a personal one. What better way to do that than to take the one thing that would remind him every day of his betrayal, his friends, his circle, the people he thought would always be there to help him pick up the pieces when things went wrong. Jake had always relied on a network of people who either didn't know or didn't care about his shady dealings. He kept his image clean by paying off the right people, making sure everyone thought he was a success. But now I started working on the people he held closest. I started calling in some of the favors they owed me, and slowly but surely, I began to turn his world upside down. I reached out to some of Jake's oldest friends, the ones who had stuck by him despite the rumors, the ones who thought of him as the golden boy who could do no wrong. I didn't need to say much, I just needed to show them the truth. I sent them emails with copies of the fraudulent documents, the bank transfers, and the legal complaints I had filed. I didn't need to convince them, they could see the cracks. Jake had always been able to manipulate them, but now they were beginning to see him for who he really was. I watched as his support system started to wither. People who had once been in his corner began pulling away, quietly, as if afraid they might get caught in the mess he had made. It didn't take long for Jake to realize that he was losing the battle, not just with the media, but with the people who had once been his allies. He had always thought he was the one calling the shots, but now he was scrambling, desperately trying to hold on to whatever fragments of his life he could. His business partners, too, were backing out. They had all felt the heat of the stories swirling around him, and they were more than willing to sever ties. Jake had made a name for himself by riding on others' coattails, using their investments to prop up his image. But once those investors realized how deep Jake's deception ran, they began pulling their money out. One by one, his business deals unraveled, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. His empire, built on half-truths and shortcuts, was crumbling before his eyes. He reached out to me, of course. Jake never could let go of the need to control. I didn't pick up the phone when he called. I didn't need to hear the desperation in his voice. He was finally facing the consequences of his actions. It was too late for apologies, too late for bargaining. He was a man caught in a web of his own making, and I wasn't about to throw him a lifeline. I wasn't the one who had put him in this position. He had done that to himself when he took my business while I was lying in a hospital bed. Now it was my turn to show him that actions have consequences. And I wasn't about to let up. As the days dragged on, I could see the toll Jake's downfall was taking on him. He had gone from a man who thought he had it all to a man who was barely holding on to the scraps of his life. His calls grew more frantic, more pleading. He started texting me, desperate, trying to find a way to fix the mess he'd created. But it wasn't my problem anymore. I had a bigger goal, and it was time to execute the final step in my plan. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't even about the business or the house. What I needed to take from Jake was something far more important: his reputation. The one thing he had spent his entire life crafting. The thing he believed would protect him no matter what. I knew this was the one thing that would break him completely, the thing he would never recover from. I started calling in some serious favors, people who had the power to make his fall from grace even more spectacular. I reached out to people in the media, to the investigative journalists who had been following the stories about his business. I made sure they had access to everything: the forgeries, the shady deals, the lies he had told to cover his tracks. I didn't just want him to lose his friends and his business, I wanted the world to see him for what he truly was: a liar, a fraud, a man who had built his entire life on the suffering of others. Jake's name was all over the news within days. It was no longer just whispers and rumors, it was a full-blown scandal. Investigations were launched, and his past transgressions were laid bare for the world to see. His name was dragged through the mud. His business, once a symbol of his success, became the poster child for corporate corruption. His name was no longer associated with success. It was associated with dishonesty and fraud. The public humiliation was more than Jake could bear. It didn't matter how many apologies he made, how many times he tried to explain himself. His reputation was in ruins, and there was nothing he could do to fix it. His former colleagues, the people who had once looked up to him, were now distancing themselves. The businesses that had once supported him were pulling out, leaving him with nothing but the fallout from his actions. Jake tried to salvage whatever he could, but it was too late. The damage had been done. His name was mud, his business was in ruins, and the people who once admired him now saw him for what he was: a fraud. I watched it all unfold from the sidelines, knowing that this was the final step. Jake had tried to take my life from me, to steal everything I had worked for while I was vulnerable. But I had taken it all back, and more. His house, his car, his reputation, everything he thought he had earned was gone, replaced by the cold, hard truth of his actions. In the end, I didn't need to say anything. I didn't need to gloat or rub it in. The consequences of his choices had already been made clear. Jake had taken everything from me while I was vulnerable, and in return I had taken everything from him without mercy.